Hello and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber of commerce. At Oregon Business Matters, we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and the state's economy. I'm Angela Wilhelms, the president and CEO of OBI and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Amy Lewin, who occupies an important position in Oregon's arts and culture ecosystem. Last November, Amy became the Director of Arts and Culture at the Oregon Arts Commission and the Oregon Cultural Trust, which are, interestingly, both a part of Business Oregon, the state's business development department. So that was a lot of agencies and offices, and we'll unpack some of that in a little bit. But I'm thrilled to be talking with Amy today about the important work these entities do, what she's learned during her first year on the job, the relationship between art and business, and what lies ahead. So thank you, Amy, for joining me today.
Angela, I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Great. Well, okay. Your title, it's a lot of words. So I think we've got this right. Director of Arts and Culture at the Oregon Arts Commission and the Oregon Cultural Trust. Does it fit on a business card?
Good question.
Okay.
There's something that I've just been saying, which is I'm Oregon's Director of Arts and Culture.
I like that. Okay. So as Oregon's Director of Arts and Culture, tell us a little bit about that role and tell us a little bit about these two entities that you work with.
Yeah, in the simplest form, I consider myself a steward of some of Oregon's big ideas related to how we identify and connect within our communities. Specifically, I am the administrator of the Oregon Arts Commission, and in that space, work closely with a board of governor-appointed volunteers in the community who help us lead on strategy to serve our arts organizations and individuals across the state. And then Oregon Cultural Trust, which was founded in the early 2000s, that is also, I'm the administrator of with its own governor-appointed board. And then the third bucket of that few people realize is all the special projects, those direct appropriations from the legislator to support cultural infrastructure in the state, I'm also the administrator of. For those who like the details, read ORS 359.
Okay, perfect. And we probably do have a few listeners who love to read a good statute or two. So you took the job in late 2025, so you're probably still getting your feet wet. How are things going?
Yeah, they're good. I've been doing a lot of listening. I've also been doing a lot of traveling. Some people call it windshield time. So I've been doing a lot of listening and thinking. And it's one of those where my investment right now is with the team and their care and understanding their needs in serving the arts and culture sector in the state. But I'm also talking to regional leaders and understanding the nuance of regional needs. I'm a lifelong Oregonian. I grew up on a farm in rural Oregon. I live in Portland now. I have this dichotomy of Oregonian experiences that I think about when I come into communities and try to understand what's happening. We, this spring, Oregon Cultural Trust team members partnered with our philanthropic partners and other state agency partners to do a series called Conversation with Funders. And that allowed us to be in 6 different regions this spring, where we talked more about understanding where the sector is, where the needs are, where there might be better statewide alignment opportunities, but also just getting to understand the work. When we talk about arts and culture and my portfolio of work, it really includes 4 core components: arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. So if you think about that as a statewide experience, that's a museum, that's a historical site, that is the preservation of a main street to activate local economies. That is in performing arts center, large performing arts centers, including famous ones like the Oregon Shakespeare Festival or our performing arts organizations like the Oregon Symphony. But it also includes smaller organizations and volunteer coalitions across the state. So it's going well, a lot of listening, a lot of understanding, and a lot of clarifying of what this sector needs right now and what arts, culture, and heritage and humanities do to serve the state.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll come back to how these entities and the work that you all do affects the local communities. But let's talk a little more about the structure, or in this, let's talk about the funding in particular. So the two organizations receive funding from a variety of sources. There's general fund, you mentioned direct appropriation for certain projects. There's the tax credit that goes into the Oregon Cultural Trust that you mentioned. There's other sources I'm not naming because I want you to do that. But talk a little bit about funding sources, and then if you could talk a little more specifically about the tax credit, because I think this is something that people see, but they don't. Maybe they see the license plate, for example, but they might not necessarily know how that all works. And tax credits are tools we talk about as return on investment. So that was a long, winding question, but I think you get the gist.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Again, I'm administering 3 core buckets that are funded 3 different ways. The Oregon Arts Commission relies on general fund dollars that amount to about 0.01% of the state's total biennium budget. And then in addition to that, we are the state agency grant recipient for the National Endowment for the Arts. We were established in 1967 as a big idea in this moment the nation was facing on funding arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. And then we have the Cultural Trust, which is funded by Oregonians for Oregonians to invest in arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. It was a visionary idea when it was set in play 25 years ago. We're celebrating 25 years. I'm looking forward to talking about that more. Thank you. But it was the intent was for Oregon to invest more deeply into arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. And so the way the tax credit works is an individual can donate to a qualified cultural nonprofit in the state, and then they match that donation with a gift to the trust. And then when it's time to file their taxes, dollar for dollar, that donation to the trust is a tax credit. And so it's capped, it's audited, it is for individuals, those filing jointly, and for corporations to give to this fund that then by statute is redistributed into every corner of the state, which is a kind of cool matrix and efficient matrix of distribution of Oregonians saying yes to culture and then putting that back into communities to do the work within their local economies.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Do you see that people, so when people give money to the trust, they can't direct it, that's the job of the trust, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then does the trust then think, okay, this is from people all over the community, so we have to sort of reinvest it? I'm not saying there's a formula or it's like a mathematical relative share back, but is there an intention then to get that back to communities across the state that have sort of on the front end supported the trust?
Yeah, that is actually a great question. There is a formula.
Oh, okay.
So every fiscal year, we receive donations from Oregonians. This last year, it's close to 5 million. Then we put that through what we call a waterfall, which is up to 40% can be invested into our corpus, the Cultural Trust Corpus, which is a fund that has been growing in the last 25 years and is at about 53 million. And then up to 60% can be redistributed into communities. And so the redistribution matrix includes our state cultural partners, so Oregon Historical Society, Oregon Humanities, the State Historic Preservation Office, Oregon Heritage Commission, Oregon Arts Commission. And then another portion is redistributed into all the cultural coalitions in our 9 federally recognized tribes across the state. And then another portion is set aside for cultural development grants to be redistributed across the state. So if you look at the last fiscal cycle, of the donations received by Oregonians, 4.15 million was then redistributed into communities through this matrix or waterfall.
Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, great. So talk to us a little bit about how the funding that comes from the Arts Commission or the Cultural Trust affects those communities. Like what are some examples of what you've seen so far?
Yeah, the work that we do right now has this play of redistribution directly into communities. So the Arts Commission, all told, this fiscal year is granting about 527 individuals or organizations grants for doing their work, whether that's a career opportunity grant for an individual artist, who many are self-employed, sole proprietors, or an arts nonprofit, or an organization partnering with an arts nonprofit doing a meaningful project in their community about arts education, learning, and access for K through 12 children in our state. And then some of those grants are also put to building communities, Main Street projects, cultural districts. What does a community need? It's really intentional, and there's a meaningful public process there. So more than 500 grants from the Arts Commission. And then the Cultural Trust is just over 600 grants in all told that are redistributed through the waterfall that I explained. But every distribution to our cultural coalitions is then decided by them in their community. So some cultural coalitions are investing in violins so the next generation can be exposed to the Suzuki method. Some are going to the dory boat efforts on the coast. Some of them are going to preserve an aging place within a main street that they want to hang on to and preserve. And some are going to do arts festivals, such as like the Sisters Folk Festival and other things that attract visitors into community.
That's really interesting, because I think some, not all, but some maybe have some assumptions about the type of work that's getting done. And it sounds so diverse, and it sounds like it's a little bit of everything based on, what might be most beneficial to those communities. And like you said, there is an element that I think is easy to forget about the tourism aspect of art. It's obviously wonderful for residents and students and the people who are going to see it on a more routine basis. But you do have that experiential component for those who visit the community, or maybe that is the reason people come.
Yes.
The festival you mentioned, other festivals, Shakespeare certainly, et cetera. So
yeah, it's something I'm thinking about a lot. Arts and culture for the state of Oregon serves as economic and civic infrastructure, but it also serves adjacent industries like tourism, like hospitality. One of the things that I hope we talk about more is I'm really curious about data points when we talk about this sector. And I'm cultivating this folder of many data points to try to quantify what the economic impact is in the state. A recent report looked at careers and organizations and assessed that to be $8.9 billion in economic contributions and about 30,000 jobs in the sector in the state. But then in addition, another 18,000 jobs that are supported adjacently through tourism and other mechanisms. What arts and culture does is not only connect our local communities, but it does attract those outside visitors. And what we know about the outside visitors who come in is they're spending more per capita when they do come in to invest. And it's not just in Portland, it's in Southern Oregon, it's in Central Oregon, it's along the coast. And so I'm getting into the details there and learning about that, but I'm thinking about that deeply because of my background and just where the state is right now in the conversations around prosperity.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it a little more. So what else is in your data folder that you want to bring to people's attention?
We are, as a state, in the top 10 for arts vibrancy, and yet we're 37th per capita in public funding. And I think that's a gap that we should talk about when we talk about competitiveness. When I hear some of our state economists talk about the needs right now, we talk about culture. We talk about that Oregon's second paycheck, right? And this idea of people who are attracted to living here, when they get here, historically have wanted to stay. And that's because of the quality of life. That's because the access to things and hobbies and opportunities. And I believe arts and culture is this quiet sector serving that in a way that I want to bring more forward and understand. So I'm working with a team on a creative economy report that we hope to release later this year to really understand that. What are the jobs? In our statute, we have a list of careers related to arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. I want to measure it. What is that economic impact? How does it relate to the traded sector? How are we as Oregonians, when we're making these big idea and these, I call them generational moment decisions, how are we considering how arts and culture have a part to play in that, so that we're really organizing the next big idea to support that and not lose it? And with the way other market forces are, I believe, as a person who loves the state, that is a super important piece of the puzzle to keep bringing forward and talking about.
Yeah, well, kudos. I love the statistics. So we're 10th. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
10th.
Top 10.
We're in the top 10 in
Arts.
vibrancy, but 37th in per capita spending. And I think that's a good example. We are often asked, where is it that we're overperforming? Because we're often, admittedly, talking about where we're underperforming, especially in relative terms to what we're spending. We're not buying as much in education or healthcare or transportation or a whole host of subject matter areas. We're not buying as much in Oregon for the money as many other states. And that's a real serious conversation we have to have around public policy and systems and processes and revenue and all that. But here we are. We're buying a lot more than other states for the money that's getting put in.
Yeah.
And do you chalk that up to that private investment that's coming in, or what do you attribute that to, other than just there's a commitment here that seems to be ingrained? It's kind of like our commitment to recycling comes naturally to us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. Part of my work in getting settled in this role is understanding where our philanthropic partners are, and they are looking at arts and culture and prioritizing it. And Oregon Community Foundation did a assessment of arts and culture funding in the state. And the highest funders right now, no surprise, is Oregon Community Foundation and their network of funding. And then it's one other organization that I think is also changing in the landscape of federal environment, but then it's the State Arts and Culture Agency. And so then there's this long list of portfolio of philanthropic support that's there. We have the Roundhouse Foundation, who's really doubling down on rural investments, specifically for arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. And so there's this partnership happening, but I think we as Oregonians have just assumed the philanthropic partners will be there, but we haven't had the conversation on the ROI of that public dollar investing in this sector in a way that makes a huge impact. To your point, we're in the top 10 arts vibrancy. There's a reason for that. People love to be engaged in that space, whether you identify with a capital A arts or lowercase arts. It's that experience we all had. But I think there's also this component of, when we talk about return on investment and the strong partnerships with our philanthropic partners, I think sometimes our lawmakers think of the agency I administer as a pass-through for grants, but we're also supporting sector convening and programs that are in statute as well, including the Percent for Art and Public Spaces program. It's a program that's been around since 1975.
Yeah, I was actually gonna ask you about this. You and I were just at an event earlier in I guess it was late spring technically, where the state capitol, the 1% for art for the state capitol project was a large portion of it was I don't know what exactly we were doing. We weren't unveiling it because it was never covered, but celebrating the installation and sort of launching it. And that was a really cool ceremony. It was a really cool experience. Is that program unique among states, or is that fairly common?
In 1975, it was very unique when it was founded here in Oregon. We were one of the first in the nation. I think we were number 2. Fortunately, a lot of states have doubled down on this because they understand the power of investing in placemaking when you're investing in infrastructure. And the Percent for Art and Public Places is designed to serve the community where the resource is being built. So the whole effort is organized around a committee of the project managers, the construction leads, the architects, community leaders who get to define what art is for that place. And you will see a whole list we have just under 3,000 pieces in our public art collection across the state. I mean, think about that. It's 50 years of this kind of infrastructure investment. And when an Oregonian goes into a university lobby or into the plaza of the state capitol, they are a part of that experience. But what they see in it and are exposed to is investments in culture keepers, investments in craftspeople, investments in distinct manufacturing, because it's not always easy to make some of these pieces, and investments in this is what is here and what we value here. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. So you talked about okay, you just mentioned manufacturing. We have some member companies that actually are in the business of doing this sort of custom fabrication with metal and other very cool products. You talked about businesses as philanthropists. You know, you go to a performance or an installation, and often there's a program or some recognition of the donors, and it's companies, local companies, national companies, global companies that have supported that work. So those are some tangible, really obvious connections between arts and business. From your seat, how do you see that connection, and why what about that connection might people not realize? Why are they like, why is she doing an Oregon Business Matters podcast about art? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, and I think one of the things I've learned in this role is it's not just art. It's arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. And so think about that. We, as a state, in the last decade, have invested in cultural infrastructure. And what that means is we've said yes, as a state, to building a new foundation for Performing Arts Center. Who does that work? When we say yes to restoring a building on Main Street in Baker City, who does that work? Skilled manufacturers and craftspeople. And so most of those projects, and this is another thing that I've been thinking about a lot, is like, what is that investment, that reinvestment of, let's say there's a grant from arts and culture that goes into community to restore or build infrastructure. What is the ripple effect of economic impact to the businesses in that community or adjacent to that community? I want to know that. I think that is a measurement of the creative economy. And so we as Oregonians have this habit of talking about arts and just kind of classifying it in this arts thing, but it's so much more. And it's a part of, if you live in Pendleton and you go to the Oregon East Symphony, your chamber concert experience is going to include accordions and harps and cellos. And everyone in the room is a part of the community there. And they're business leaders, they're community leaders, and they're people who say yes to this concept of gathering and supporting this. So, Angela, that's a lot, but I think it's important for us as Oregonians, specifically business leaders who I know value this across the state and double down with investments of their own money, that we're serving the state and we have an opportunity to really serve it in a more focused and aligned and efficient way.
Yeah, I think this is good because it's important to remember, and I've even done it a few times throughout this, like I just say arts writ large. But yeah, you're talking about buildings and historic signage, and you're talking about, I think about the university building I was in Eastern Oregon, where, there's a giant, and I mean giant double helix installed as part of their art. And so but there are also murals and paintings and statues and carvings and on all of that. And so it's so different. It can be very different things in very different places and to very different people. And we sort of maybe lump it all together in one way, but also at the same time, we also just probably define it very narrowly without thinking broadly, the music, the performance pieces. So there is a little something for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think I grew up in a place where I didn't identify as an artist or a creative. And I live now in a space where I live with artists and creatives. But I also am thinking distinctly about how we as Oregonians do make those connections.
Yeah. So, well, you just alluded to this, but you're no stranger to Oregon's business sector. You worked for a number of years for the Portland Business Alliance, a regional chamber. You were on our board at OBI for a bit. You worked for news entities that are for-profit businesses. So you're actually in a fairly unique position to understand the importance of a healthy private sector, which, this, we're going to get it back to OPI's mission here, of course, but the importance of a healthy private sector to arts and culture broadly. So can you talk about that, how you reflect on that, and what you see as the need for restoring that healthy private sector?
Yeah. Well, if you own or are leading a business in the state right now, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah. And it's, I also am someone who, I think my colleagues at the chamber would say this, like when things are hard, I double down on the positivity, which is why I'm really enjoying this role now. But when I was at the Metro Chamber, our state went through some really historic challenges. And one of the things that I learned is when things get hard, you have to find where your partners are. And sometimes they're non-traditional partners. And you also have to get really focused on where your resources are and what you can apply with those resources to make the biggest difference. And if there's anything that working in the private sector, working in nonprofits, and now working in public services taught me, it's that. But I'm also thinking about at the top of my HR platform here at the state, I work for the people of Oregon. And throughout my entire career, that has been a common thread of how do I communicate, connect, and make a difference for my community. And so it's definitely this purpose-driven focus, but also knowing that there are good things happening. And despite the challenges for many of our business leaders to keep jobs here, to keep investing here, this is a place where people still do want to live. And we have a cultural vitality that can play a part in that. I've seen that in the investment we did early on at the Chamber with the Portland Winter Light Festival. And now if you look at that, there is broad agreement in the public and private sector that we agree this is contributing to foot traffic. This is contributing to downtown Portland's recovery.
Yeah, that's a good example. I like that. So now, and you mentioned it, you have always maybe in spirit worked for the people of Oregon. Now you technically do in this role. We mentioned it early on that this role, these entities, the Arts Commission, the Cultural Trust, are embedded in what is statutorily known as the Oregon Business Development Department, which might seem incongruent to people. I think you've done a great job of drawing that connection. But there has been a proposal in the past to separate that out. I think it was the 2025 session that would have sort of merged the entities and created them outside of Business Oregon. Is that a proposal that's likely to reemerge? And how do you guys think about that, pros, cons?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's very possible we'll see the idea again. A semi-independent agency for arts and culture to serve the state and to serve the people of Oregon is a powerful concept if you think about it. And I mentioned generational moments. In the early 2000s, I don't know if everyone realizes this, but Travel Oregon was a part of the state's business development department, and then decided and worked on an agreement for a semi-independent agency. And then a couple of years later, figured out a funding mechanism for that. But if you think about now, we're 23, 24 years later, Travel Oregon is this vast network of defining our state and attracting visitors to the state, but also investing in destinations, partnering with regional leaders to make that happen. And so I see huge potential in that kind of an example in doing sector-wide support across the state, being more agile, being more efficient. Right now, I am the administrator to two very different boards. And so consolidating that to create a semi-independent agency that is invested in arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. In concept, the work wouldn't change that much because it's work we're already doing.
Right.
But the focus and the ability to meet the sector where its needs are right now could transform the conversation.
What do you say to skeptics who are like, "Uh-oh, a new agency"? I mean, what do you say to skeptics who are going to automatically assume that's going to mean,
More.
more overhead or more?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And at the end of the day, it's about accountability and stewardship. And I value that deeply. However, the state right now is having big conversations about how we move forward. And arts and culture is currently not at the table. And so I think about that. And I think about what if and how might we, as Oregonians, redesign this agreed big idea that's happened through a couple generations in serving the state in arts, culture, heritage, and humanities. And what if that became a model that could be more responsive, more efficient, and more aligned with the needs?
Good answer. Yeah, I think, not that you asked, but, I'm going to ask myself and then answer. One of the things that pops into my head too is, we talk a lot about economies of scale and efficiency and coordination, and that can be great, but it only works if there's actually, to your point, sort of alignment and an actual benefit from that. Just shoving things together for the sake of shoving things together doesn't necessarily equate to economies of scale or savings in that sense. So I think that's actually something that we are, and I'm not going to put you on the spot here, but that's actually something, we've been talking about a lot at OBI, which is, maybe also some reshuffling and separation not only allows particular functions to have more and better focus themselves, but also in turn allows business development, that department, to also have some focus for itself too. And I'm not saying that there isn't a connection between the two and that wouldn't always remain. Like you mentioned, travel and tourism inherently connected to business and economic development. But anyway, so that's just our musing is, where do we need to be focused, and maybe where have we gone awry a little bit, or just over time evolved to where the current structures and setups aren't letting everyone succeed.
Anyone who's ever worked with me knows I'm a systems thinker.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is I operate a program within a $2 billion agency that has a high velocity of customer service and distribution of funds in the state. I think I mentioned to you, we have nearly 1,100 grants we distribute in the state every fiscal cycle. That's 2,200 every biennium. The amounts are smaller, but they're having a higher impact in the community. But that operational structure, if you look at it from just a systems perspective, is very different than the way Business Oregon administers so many other programs.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And again, to get that efficiency from consolidation or economies of scale, there has to be systems alignment. That's the sort of point. And yeah, okay, that's interesting. Well, we look forward to seeing if that pops back up as a proposal. Amy, we are almost out of time. Is there anything else you want to make sure listeners know or understand about the work of you and your team, or arts, culture, heritage, and humanities across the state before we sign off?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of this podcast. So Angela, thank you for having me here.
We have one. Note it for the record. We have one.
I listen to it because I want to know what's happening in Oregon. And this is such a great resource. And leaders who you have on and their stories and sharing and experiences are something I value deeply. And so one of the things that I'm continuing to think about is Oregon's arts, culture, heritage, and humanities organizations offer some of the state's most efficient and economic contributions to the civic infrastructure here in the state. It's something that we need to start talking about more, and how that strategic investment through arts, culture creates stronger partnerships within business and philanthropy. It drives jobs, it drives tourism and attractiveness to space. It creates resilient infrastructures for the future. And I'm really optimistic about a more modern strategy and the opportunity to have that kind of conversation on behalf of Oregonians. And, My commitment is statewide impact for rural to urban today and long term. And as a current steward of this program on behalf of Oregonians, it's an honor, but it's also a call to invite others to help and be a part of this generational moment.
Yeah, well, thank you for the work that you're doing. And we will continue to do our mission driven work of driving a more competitive, healthy, and prosperous economy so that we have companies making profits that can be reinvested in the work you're doing, so that we have individuals gainfully employed with good wages so that they can reinvest in the work that you're doing, so that we can all help make that ecosystem work. So thank you very much, Amy Lewin, Director of Arts and Culture at the Oregon Arts Commission and the Oregon Cultural Trust, for joining us today. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry, your statewide chamber. Our episodes can be found on all of the top podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. So please like, follow, share, and all of that jazz. For more information about Amy, your work, where can folks go?
You can go to culturaltrust.org, and I think that's the easiest one. The .gov is a little more complicated, but look us up on socials. The Oregon Arts Commission, Oregon Cultural Trust have some lovely social channels, and encourage that as well.
Okay, great. And for more information about OBI, listeners, you can visit OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Thank you very much.